Today, we're going to put literature on the couch. We're going to explore a really powerful way of reading that looks right past the plot and digs deep into the hidden mind of a story itself.
You know that feeling, right? When you're reading a book and you just want to shout at a character, why would you do that? Why do heroes hesitate? Why do people in stories sometimes sabotage their own happiness? Well, it turns out there's a whole way of thinking dedicated to figuring that out. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll get into this idea that a story can have its own mind. Then, we'll crack open Sigmund Freud's toolkit and look at his core concepts. After that, we'll see it in action, check out how the theory has changed over time, and finally, we'll hand you this new lens to try out for yourself.
All right, first up, the mind of the story. This is all about uncovering the hidden meanings that are simmering just below the surface of the words on the page.
You see, psychoanalytic critics look at a story kind of like a dream. You've got the manifest content, that's the surface stuff, the plot, who did what, where they went. But underneath all that, you have the latent content, and that's the hidden story, the real engine of the narrative, full of repressed desires and anxieties. Our job is to be literary detectives and find that story.
And that's the official term for what we're doing. Psychoanalytic criticism takes the tools of psychoanalysis, first developed by the one and only Sigmund Freud, and applies them to books. You can think of Freud as the original codebreaker for the human mind, and we're just borrowing his methods to decode the stories we love. So what exactly is in this toolkit? Come on, let's open it up and see if we can find the keys to the mind's hidden away places.
Okay, the biggest, most fundamental idea here is the unconscious. You've probably heard the iceberg analogy, right? The little tip you see poking out of the water, that's your conscious mind. But that enormous, vast, hidden chunk of ice underneath, that's the unconscious. It's this deep, dark storage unit for all our forgotten memories, forbidden wishes, and secret fears. And it's pulling the strings without us even realizing it.
Now, Freud saw our inner world as this constant battle between three main players. First, you've got the id. This is your primal instinct, the little kid inside that screams, "I want it now!" Then there's the superego, that's your inner critic, the voice of your parents and society whispering, "Oh, you can't do that." And caught right in the middle is the poor ego, just trying to play referee between the two and keep you grounded in reality.
So when that fight gets way too intense, the mind has a defense mechanism called repression. Think of it like a bouncer at the nightclub of your conscious mind. It takes all the painful memories and inappropriate thoughts and just shoves them down into the basement, into the unconscious. The only problem? They don't just go away. They're always down there, trying to find a way back upstairs.
And when they sneak back in, they do it in disguise. Freud called this whole process the dream work. Two of its favorite tricks are displacement. That's when you're furious at your boss, but you go home and yell at the cat instead. And condensation. That's where one single image in a story, like say a crumbling tower, might stand for a failing marriage, job stress, and a fear of death, all at the same time. The unconscious speaks in code, which is what makes literature such a perfect hunting ground for it.
Okay, enough with the theory. Let's see how this stuff actually works. We're going to use this toolkit to try and crack one of the biggest literary mysteries of all time, Shakespeare's Hamlet.
I mean, this is the question that has puzzled people for over 400 years. Hamlet's dad appears as a ghost, tells him he was murdered by his own brother, who then went and married Hamlet's mom. The ghost says, "Avenge me." And what does Hamlet do? He spends the rest of the play just hesitating. He talks and talks and talks. So what is the deal? Why the delay?
Well, the psychoanalytic answer, which Freud himself came up with, is a doozy. It's both shocking and kind of perfectly logical. Hamlet can't punish his uncle because, on some deep, unconscious level, his uncle did the exact same thing Hamlet secretly wanted to do.
This is the classic Oedipus complex. The theory goes that as a child, Hamlet had a repressed desire for his mother and saw his father as a rival. Well, his uncle Claudius just went and lived out that forbidden childhood fantasy. So for Hamlet to kill Claudius would feel like punishing himself for his own dark thoughts. It's that intense, unconscious guilt that paralyzes him. And honestly, this reading totally changed how people thought about the play, moving the conversation from Hamlet's morals to his psychology.
But the story doesn't just stop with Freud, not by a long shot. Like any big idea, psychoanalysis kept changing and evolving.
Later on, a French psychoanalyst named Jacques Lacan came along and offered a really radical update. He took a look at Freud's work and said, you know what, the unconscious isn't just some messy basement full of feelings. He argued that it's actually structured just like a language, with its own rules and grammar. And that was a huge shift in focus. For critics who followed Lacan, you don't try to psychoanalyze the author, you psychoanalyze the text itself.
The story's language becomes your patient, and you hunt for unconscious clues in patterns, in wordplay, in slips of the tongue. You look for the text's own Freudian slips.
Now, it is so important to remember that this isn't some perfect accepted science. Psychoanalytic criticism has gotten some major pushback over the years, and you really have to approach it with a critical eye.
And a huge flashpoint for that criticism comes from one of Freud's own case studies. It involved an 18-year-old patient he gave the name Dora, and her case is often looked at today for what it reveals about the potential blind spots in the theory. So Dora was really upset after a family friend made an unwanted sexual move on her. She reacted with disgust, which seems pretty reasonable, right? Well, Freud interpreted that disgust as a neurotic reaction. For later critics, this case became Exhibit A. They argued that it showed how early psychoanalysis was tangled up in the patriarchal biases of its time, and that it could end up treating women's totally valid experiences as a sickness.
So, after all that, the theory, the practice, the problems, what's the big takeaway? How can you actually use this when you're reading?
The real danger is getting so into the theory that you start seeing every single story as just a psychology report. This is not a one-size-fits-all solution, but it is an incredibly powerful lens. It gives you permission to look for that hidden psychodrama, all the unconscious fights and motivations that make a story feel so deep and real.
So the next time you're reading a book and a character does something that makes absolutely no logical sense, you'll have a new set of tools. You can ask, what's being repressed here? What secret desire could be driving this crazy behavior? You now have the key to look for the story behind the story. So the only question left is, what hidden stories are you going to unlock?